That's the other goal that we have, like, learning to test, but also learning to document as automation, because that's how you do proper exploratory testing right now. So having someone who has no tech background, absolutely none, it's been interesting teaching bits and pieces, kind of like the easiest way to automate by basically record and playback, which is something I don't want to keep around, but 1 week can be record and playback. It's not much if they get some of the basic concepts of what does maintenance mean. And then second week we did API testing with approvals and Python. And it was so simple and straightforward, and getting to the structures of what does a class look like, and why does it matter to have a class, and why don't you just write a script as such, and what kind of bits and pieces are there. And now I just left them back there struggling with what I want them to get to by the end of the summer, which is what the team works with, which is Jest and JavaScript and Puppeteer, and creating first test cases of that. And again, that's the direction where they're going, because that's the direction where the team is. The thing that I need to fix is that the testing cannot be the tester's job in my latest team. It needs to be the team's job, and choosing proper tools that the team can share and wants to share. Even if it's a new environment and a little bit of a discomfort for me, it's the important thing to do.
So here's something that I've noticed with how people learn, because I'm very much a person that I will jump into a deep end. So give it all to me, and then that doesn't scare me. So I'm happy to jump in, but then I take a step back and go, okay, I'm completely overwhelmed. I haven't a clue what I'm doing here. I don't have a clue. Now let me slowly go off and start with this, right? And that's how I manage my own learning and stuff. So that's a very common thing I see I do. And when I first went sort of helping people, and this was developers and testers, to kind of take on their own learning, one of the things that I would do is I thought, that's how I learn. That's how you learn. Right? So I'd just be chucking everyone into the deep end, and go, yeah, here you go, go have a go with that and come back to me, and some people loved it. It was amazing. And they just like, freedom at last. Other people just completely terrified. And so I was wondering, for you, do you notice, have you observed that? Do you change your style appropriately depending on how you see that, or?
Yeah, definitely. Being panicked isn't really the platform you can learn from. So if you find yourself of panic and you feel like it's really work quite as well as you'd like, it's not gonna be a good way of learning. So sometimes, like, I find that some people, they really need this kind of like, the bigger picture first, kind of like, give me concepts. I will need to learn this and this and this and this. But then they are ready to dig in to some area. Other people find that area themselves. Some people just don't see the area they could start from. So really listening, kind of like, being present and listening and figuring out what's on their mind and what's their concern is very much the thing to do. But also, they probably won't be using any kind of like easy words on, like, you could look at from syllabus, all the things you need to know so that you become a good tester. They don't use those words. And an interesting experiment with my summer trainee right now has been that when I give words to the things that I've taught them, they actually don't recognize those words. They know that they've done those things, but they wouldn't never ever describe them in the words that I use. So again, kind of like, there's a big discrepancy, big difference between the way they see the work they end up doing and the way I would describe it, having a lot more contextual information over the years.
So why do you think that is? Why do you think they have a different viewpoint?
I think it's mostly that I am, with 25 years, I've come way too comfortable with the terminology. And let's face it, testing in particular, we've created barriers with the terminology. Having to know the difference between a unit and a system test isn't actually a very practical one. but it's one that comes up in every single course the summer trainee has taken.
Right.
So whenever she's now writing code and she's using jest, she's asking, is this now a system test or is this a unit test? And that's actually not a helpful distinction. It's a user interface test, but it might not make sense to kind of use those words. And we are really a heavy terminology area, both in testing, but in software development in general. So we quite easily talk about all this stuff on like, HTML and CSS, and that's React, and that's that, and blah, blah, blah. We have all these words that we use. And it sounds, for new person, it sounds like the concepts we're talking about, they make no sense, and that they have no connection to reality in their world. And it takes some years of socializing into this. This is the way we speak. Before they get to that. And they can already do the work without being able to kind of like appear smart and speak in the way we do in the industry. So I think we've done a bit of a disservice over the years to the newcomers, that we use scary terminology to make sense into our own heads, and we pretend as if it was supposed to be somehow universal. And we need a lot of concepts.
I wonder if it's just a shortcut, I mean, in a way of communicating, that you once you have a social language that you can all identify and use, it's a kind of shortcut to describing something. So if I talk about Jess or talk about unit tests, everyone goes, oh yeah, I know what that is, even though maybe they have different understanding of it, right? But that's a different conversation. But I have noticed this about your writing, and I have noticed this about how you talk and how you describe things, is that you do make a huge, I think it's a huge effort anyway, to use vocabulary that is not necessarily typical vocabulary in testing. It's like you'll find your own way to describe what you do and how you do it. Is that just you see how you see the world, or is that something that you do for another reason?
I believe language is it's like a lens. It's like it's an amplifier to seeing certain things. So with a learning mindset, which is what I really try to do, kind of like going to work and learning new things, even about the old stuff that we keep doing the same way, I try to figure out if the inertia that has been created by doing it the same way is actually necessary, or if we should break it with an experiment of some sort. So using language in a different way is a way of breaking out, kind of like seeing, amplifying, magnifying some aspect of that. So I find that a lot of times going into a conversation using words that neither one of us really know and trying to mess things up a bit, that's what creates this catalytic reaction. So it's very much a chosen way of thinking.
Okay. Yeah.
And I'm very much a believer in this idea that instead of having defined words, we need more words to have an actual conversation around those words. Of what do we mean by them, and why are they relevant, and how does that somehow impact the overall outcome? Because what we're still trying to do is build products with the right kind of quality. And for me, quality really, it includes the cost of it. It includes getting something valuable out of the costs that we're putting in. It's things around opportunity cost. And from the user's perspective, what it really comes down to is kind of this idea of how they feel about the product. And if the feeling is strong enough for them to act on it, either on the positive side or on the negative side. So there's this book, Kathy Sierra's, the book is called Badass. And there's this idea that we create software because we want to make people awesome. So the software is not just so that it fulfills a need, but it needs to fulfill a need that is a little bit deeper, that makes us somehow better because we have that software. And I really love the example that she was using around that, which is that if you have a camera, like you can talk about the kind of like the shutter details, the technical details of that camera like forever, and list all of those features. But what really matters to a relevant segment of people is that you take a selfie and you look awesome and you want to post it on social media.
Mm.
And the fact that we nowadays have cameras that actually help us do that, that's kind of the thinking that takes us on the quality side, takes us kind of like a step further from it does what it was supposed to, what we could imagine. But then it stretches our imagination into kind of delighting the customer. And of course, on the negative side, it could be kind of lack of delight that we're looking for.
Yes,
And when they call you because they have a problem, that's already going quite far in their dissatisfaction.
Mm-hmm.
Because most people nowadays, they don't call, they just wait for a few days hoping it will vanish. Or they move into someone else's software, or they find something else to do so they don't have to touch your software. But the last thing they would do, unless they have to, is call you and complain about it.
I think that's a really interesting way of looking at quality. And one of the things that I've been thinking about just today, funnily enough, has been that area of support and what is quality in those terms. Like, I've worked with clients and they're like, if we monitor that they're actually having to go to help, that's an indication for us that we haven't actually delivered the type of quality that we want. You know, we want it to be so easy that they don't need that assistance. There's other bits as well to that. If you think about support of infrastructure, the grunty stuff that has to keep the lights on in order for that consumer to be delighted by their product, there's that type of support too. And there's also, I think, the support in the sense of rather than thinking of things as product, but also as service. So we're actually not delivering products, we're actually delivering a service to people. And how are we doing on that service? Thinking about quality in those terms, you know, especially if we're delivering APIs and things like that. And it's not something that you just hand over and that they use. It's a whole relationship that's happening in there, I guess. I don't know. Have you looked into that at all?
Well, I spend a lot of my energy on that space as well.
Oh, cool.
I actually find that support side and then the product management side are the ones that kind of like somehow drag me in, because there's scale of things to work on in there. And a lot of the software that I've recently been building is kind of like software as a service. So the product is a service. And a lot of the work in that space then is framed around, if they're not delighted every month, they won't pay next month. So they can go away. Yeah. So it's kind of like it's interwoven in the way of building that service. So so you really, like, for example, sometimes when we had to make some changes that would require actions from the users. That's basically taking away from their time, because they have to do something themselves. And if you do that once a year and you warn them ahead of time, then they can schedule it and prepare for it, and it's generally okay. But if you do that too often, it's definitely taking down the perception of quality on what they feel is the value of this service. So the interesting aspect around this, when you're aware of what kind of things have these kind of impacts and consider them as part of your planning and designing of the experience that the users will have, is that some features, even if you would like to have them right now, you need to choose between, we get either this or this. And one of these needs to be a completely silent one. Like, it can't interrupt things. And some markets definitely are more sensitive to any kind of interruptions from whatever they were expecting as the normal status quo. So there's particular areas, geographical areas, that you can kind of like expect. Like Japan is a very specific area in that sense, that you would almost like, if you want to have a good quality with that particular market, you would need to communicate differently than you would expect to have to communicate for people in Finland.
Okay,
so
that's really interesting.
All of that is really interesting.
That's all we have time for in this week's episode. Join us in the next episode when we continue this conversation with Maaret. And if you want to avoid FOMO, why not hit the subscribe button? That way you can be notified when the next episode is published. See you then.